Hi, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Risk. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal. Here we explore how leaders in medtech navigate uncertainty, make better risk based decisions, and build safe and effective medical products to support sustainable business growth. Today, I'm super excited to welcome my guest, Ankita Mishra. She is the Digital Health Quality Director at Avinova. Now, I have known Ankita for some time now, and we also met recently at the IMSC 26 conference in Boston. By the way, if you guys did not attend that, we had a session about a couple of weeks ago where we had highlights with 4 key members of that conference. So take a look at that. The link is out there on my Substack. But with that, I'm so pleased to invite Ankita today to talk to us about AI governance. I know it's on your mind as well. So we'll get into that. But as you are settling down, please know that this is just a conversation and you are part of it. So make sure you are sharing your comments and questions and thoughts in the chat, and I'll bring them here in the discussion as much as possible. With that, Ankita, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm good, Naveen, and thank you so much for this opportunity.
Wonderful. So Ankita, let's start by having you share with us very briefly your career journey. What has brought you to this point where you are now acting as the Digital Health Quality Director?
Yeah, sure, definitely. I'm a biomedical engineer by training. However, I started my professional journey as a software developer. Then I transitioned to device development. I worked on class 2 devices, 3's implantable sensors, RPMs, CGMs, and around 2019, I transitioned from product development to process development in a pharma company. So that's been my progressive career pathway so far. And what that has provided me is the opportunity to predominantly work in the software space more than other areas, but also look at the diverse inputs that help shape the decision making, how to be critical about risk, for example, or how to develop your products, how to be agile, how to work with ambiguity, how to move fast, yet make sure in a regulated space you still have to be compliant to the regulations and requirements. So all that for the past almost 2 decades now has helped me transition into my current role, which focuses more on supporting AI solution development in a GXP environment. And we are more aligned to GCP regulations. And so that's my background, my academic as well as professional.
Wonderful. So you have seen it all. And I think you bring up an interesting point that we have to move fast, but we also have to do it responsibly. And we have to make safe and effective devices. It's kind of, in my view, a little bit of a conflict that we face every day. And now with AI coming onto the scene and we are talking about something that we don't know much about, this becomes a kind of difficult problem, is it not? What is your view on really thinking about this problem from that perspective?
So I would agree it is a difficult problem, but it's not impossible, right? The way I look at it, impossible says I am possible. So that's my outlook on everything. I'm a big practitioner of systems engineering. And what systems engineering offers you is to look at things critically. And what critical thinking supports is to work with ambiguity, to be fast, but not ignore the other constraints that we often have to work with in a regulated space, whether it's high risk, it's low risk, or a different risk profile altogether. So with that approach in mind, we have to make informed decisions. And the more information we have with us, look at it as if we have floating dots around us. We have to identify the right dots. We have to connect the dots and make sure from a system perspective, in the context of that system being used in a specific environment, it makes sense. So that's why I like to use that systems thinking and critical thinking analogy here, because it helps you to identify the dots. It helps you to establish the relationships between those dots. And at the system level, it helps you to understand what the end user needs. And that's directed towards the intended use. But we have to think about it in a critical manner and in a risk-based manner. It cannot be one rule applies to all.
Yeah, I just love that perspective, how you have positioned this as a key role for critical thinking. And I think that is where all of us have a role to play, using our knowledge and experience and judgment and applying critical thinking. We hear so much about AI is doing this, AI is doing that. But what I'm hearing you say is that in the middle of it, there is a big need for applying risk-based critical thinking. We are going to be even more, I would say, important in the whole ecosystem driven by AI, not less important. That's what I feel, right?
So no, I absolutely agree.
Yeah. So let's jump into our conversation today. So many people talk about AI governance. And the first thing that comes to mind when I hear the word governance, oh my God, more procedures, more rules. And I know a lot of people might be thinking about that. How do we frame this conversation about AI governance, not as a barrier to innovation, but as a catalyst for innovation, which helps us be responsible? Can you help us frame that?
I will echo your sentiment in the sense that AI governance is always perceived. It's a checklist. I have like these 100 things to do. This is a paper exercise, but let me present a different view on it. Think of AI governance by design as a concept. We are aware of quality by design, security by design, privacy by design. So let's think of it as AI governance by design. When you stop thinking or looking at it from that perspective, it offers a different outlook. So I'm focusing more on what I need to do with my existing dots, as in, let's say, my software development lifecycle, which I'm using to develop my solutions anyways. If it's AI, there's software involved. And as part of that journey, what are the controls that I can embed as part of my existing infrastructure, existing processes? So let's not think about as I'm creating a new wrapper all around. Rather, I'm trying to fit in the missing pieces that help me navigate, mitigate those risks that the technology now brings into picture.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say that is, let's not think about AI governance as an add-on requirement after things have been done, but think of it as early on how we can create a frame where AI can be deployed responsibly using a risk-based approach. So start from the beginning, not in the end. And I think that's a mindset people have. We talk about do risk management early on. We talk about human factors early on. And we intuitively understand that, but I just feel like it's very hard for us to implement, right? First, so I want to confirm with you my understanding of what we were just talking about. And second, maybe reflect on why we find it so hard to implement anything by design.
I would say part of it is, do we trust what we are doing and will it have the intended outcome? If you really start thinking in that, I mean, is it worth the investment? Am I going to get the ROI? Because when we start shifting left, it also means we are putting more thought process up front. And that's what, if you go back to my earlier comment on systems thinking and critical thinking, what systems engineering is asking us to do is spend some time on the planning phase if you want to avoid rework later downstream. So that's where we have to think about it critically, in the sense that what does my trust translate into in terms of, let's say product requirements or functional requirements. It all starts with defining those requirements up front. How much risk is my intended use going to translate for my end user? What mitigations am I going to have in place? And what's interesting about use of AI in a responsible manner is it's not just about the technology. Technology is the least of our concerns. There are all these peripheral necessities, like, are we in compliance with privacy regulations? Are we making sure the security breaches do not introduce other unintentional consequences? So there's a lot of this cross collaboration input from other areas of product development, which is very much aligned to how you would think of when you're considering a system and its components. So the concepts are not new. It's just looking at it with a different lens and looking at it early on. Start with ROI, for example. Let's understand if AI is even the right way to solve the problem we are trying to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you made several key points, which I want to make sure I emphasize a little bit. What I'm hearing you say is thinking about AI in a broader sense, not as a governance model to be imposed later on, but within the context of the system itself. AI is the enabler of what we are trying to achieve, the intended use and indication. And the basic question to ask is, do we even need it, right? Just because our top management is saying, oh, we must do something with AI, doesn't mean we have to do it. We have to be responsible. So listen, this is fantastic setup for our conversation today. Very good context. And I love the point you made that technology is not the main problem here. The main problem here is understanding and applying that critical thinking and judgment in a systems engineering framework. So let's talk about a little bit. You mentioned briefly digital health lifecycle before. There's a framework, and of course, people in our industry understand the SDLC model, the digital health model. But help us, dig into that a little bit deeper. What does that mean? And maybe you can give us an example.
Sure. So the way I like to visualize things in my head, Naveen, is, let's say we understand the product portfolio. Any organization would have their product portfolio. It could be just a singular type of product or could be multiple. If we could visualize that in the sense, let's have a 2x2 matrix wherein I have some regulated, some non-regulated. These could be non-regulated tools, for example, which could be AI based. And then how much risk do they incur? If I create
for example, let's give some examples, but in the digital health context. So Let's say we have an app that is just collecting data and displaying data, like a glucose monitoring app. That
Right.
could be different than an app which monitors data and actually predicts what the level would be and allows the pump to inject insulin. Like there's two different scenarios, correct?
Right. Yes.
So in
Yes.
this framework, let's talk about that.
So let's say we talk about just collection and display versus helping make some decision making. I mean, it's involved in decision making, right? Let's
Mhm.
look at these two separate profiles. We'll categorize data collection display as low risk and the other case as a high risk. So we have different risk profiles here. Let's say, and just this is hypothetically speaking, one of them is non-regulated, the other one is regulated. So you see there's a matrix there wherein we have low risk, non-regulated, high risk, regulated. If
Mhm.
now we look at this from a framework perspective, and let's say we have procedures that are not static but offer the flexibility to define the rigor based on which cell of this matrix I select, I only focus on that part of my product development requirements, for example. Not everything needs to apply everywhere.
Yeah.
So your whole QMS could become like a framework rather than a static set of requirements that every single product has to follow to the code.
Wow, this is amazing. But just to clarify for everybody what you said, risk on one axis, regulated or not on the other axis. And in regulation, we are talking about whether FDA is regulating our digital health product as a device or not, right? We can
Absolutely.
understand that.
Yes.
So
So it's
by
yes,
risk
it's a
we
table.
mean by risk we mean lower. And let's just not get too stuck on terminology or granular, but keep it high level. And what I'm hearing you say is that QMS should be flexible in applying the requirements to this portfolio and the grid. And the same application could have software functions which are low risk and not regulated and high risk and regulated. So we could think about that. You bring up a point where, we have been talking about this concept for a while on Let's Talk Risk, is that the QMS itself, we should start looking at that as a system. And with QMSR, now FDA expecting us to apply risk-based decision and judgment throughout the system. What we are talking about here becomes very relevant, is it not?
Absolutely. And look at any other framework, at least in the AI space as well. I mean, you look at the NIST frameworks, whether it's security or privacy or AI, everything is risk-based. So the mindset has already shifted, even from a standards perspective or the state-of-art ways of implementing these technologies. So why shouldn't I QMS, for example?
This is an important point, Ankita. Definitely it'll require us to not only change our mindset, but also our practices, because currently in our industry, we are so driven by procedures. Everything has to be controlled by procedures, forms and templates and audits. How do we bridge that gap? How do we go towards a model which is a little bit more flexible, still compliant, but flexible and constantly evolving? Any thoughts on that?
I believe a big part of that, Naveen, the way I see it, is the ability to justify and have a really good rationale behind your decision making. I do not believe our even device regulations, for example, restrict the manufacturers from implementing the requirements in the way it works for their device portfolio. But in my experience, what I have seen is there's often a hesitation to explain that in the right context. It's the justification that everybody's looking for. Why does something apply? And then that kind of naturally progresses to its defined output. However, when something does not apply, let's rationalize it. It's a critical thinking piece. And I can give you a quick example.
Yeah, sure.
During my early days of product development, I was working on a project where we were doing MRI testing for shunts and catheters. And ceramic it doesn't matter. It doesn't react to the magnetic fields and all. So there's no need to really test it. I can rationalize it. But am I going to go ahead and still test it to demonstrate that it's MR safe, for example? So these are the kind of things wherein let's use established science or clinical practices to rationalize where something can easily be rationalized, not overthink it, and focus more on areas that are of much higher risk and they require more rigor.
Yeah, that's a great example. I really appreciate that, Ankita. Okay, so let's get back on track. We still want to talk about AI governance. Maybe you can help us think about AI governance from a model. What are people looking at when they say, hey, AI governance means this, and how you could apply it? Can you give us some tangible examples?
So from my perspective, and again, I believe more like, okay, we have to think of AI governance as part of the design decision making itself. It's not a checklist. It's not just merely oversight. And what we need to make sure is it has all the right people in the mix, especially when we talk about AI and if we are procuring third-party AI solutions, supply chain becomes very critical. And not that it's not already critical in the device space, for example, or even in non-device spaces, but given the codependency with the vendors and the terms and conditions, for example, and the privacy issues and the security concerns and the infrastructure dependencies, it's very important to make sure we really understand whether we are going to go in-house way or we are going to procure things, and how does it reflect in our entire ecosystem of how we are developing our products and deploying them, and then maintainability. It's not a one-time thing. Once we release or deploy our solutions, we have to maintain them. We have to constantly check for drifts and performance. So starting from the very beginning to all the way, how do we manage to maintain it? That all has to be part of the AI governance setup. And it's more than oversight. That's why I look at it more from an execution perspective than, okay, what do we have on paper? And then did we check all the check marks? We have to embed those considerations in our existing processes. We have to have the right people at the right time making the right decisions. Break the silos.
So in some ways, Ankita, then it is no different than thinking about the governance model for the quality system itself.
Absolutely not. That's why I mean that the underlying principles, the underlying fundamentals, they are not different. It's just focusing on the constraints and the risks the technology is introducing.
Yeah. So I'm going to touch upon a slightly controversial point here. And at Let's Talk Risk, we talk about these things in a very open way. A lot of people are already using an eQMS software, right? So many vendors out there. I'm nothing against any of these vendors. They do good technology, good work. Certainly, you are confronted with an option, somebody coming and telling you, hey, we have this AI governance module in the eQMS software for us. What are some of the questions we should be asking before we make a decision?
I believe we really need to understand what this solution is doing behind the scene. Like, for example, is it going to train on our data? How much invasive it will be with regards to our products? As in, if it's helping with requirements creation, for example, it will touch the code. Are we okay with that? What does it mean in terms of our data sharing agreements? What does it mean in terms of how much disclosure is offered to our customers, for example, downstream? So it goes back to that trust factor again. And because of so much unknown and uncertainty, we don't have an acceptance criteria for everything yet. Regulations are still chasing. So is there a known way to do it? No. And that's why we have to look at it in the context of the risks involved with our products. With low risks, it might be an acceptable thing to move forward with. With high risks, we may need additional controls in place or additional agreements in place with our suppliers, for example, when onboarding. And again, going back to the very initial thing, is it worth the investment? How is this solution going to help me beyond a certain point than what we've been doing? Are there other ways to implement AI, still maintain the integrity of the output that we want to and the trust we want to offer to our different stakeholders, and still meet what we're trying to achieve here?
Wonderful. That's an excellent summary, and really applying the principle of flexible decision making. And if the software allows us to do that, fine, great. Yeah, it'll help us a lot. But if it doesn't, and if we cannot really have trust in the solution, let's hold off on that a little bit and maybe not jump into it. So I think these are the questions that practitioners like us should be asking before these decisions are made, because we are shaping those decisions internally. Okay.
Start small and see if it makes sense, and then scale up.
The sandbox type of an approach. I love that. I love that greatly. Ankita, now let's switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk to you more in terms of, I would say, personal and professional development for all of us in the field. At the conference, many people came and talked to me, specifically asking me, hey, AI is coming and we are concerned about whether it'll take away our jobs or not. Some people believe it'll be bad for us. Some people believe it'll be good for us. What is your perspective in terms of what we should be doing as QA, RA, risk professionals to make sure that we are prepared for an environment where, we have to accept it. AI is going to be utilized in some way or another. How can we continue to stay ahead of the curve, making sure that our critical thinking and judgment and skills are still needed? What should we be doing, Ankita? Do you have any perspective on?
So my personal take has always been like, I believe in lifelong learning, and this is about upskilling ourselves. Can we predict the future? Definitely not. When things move from hardware to software, what really happened? We just had new ways of doing something different, then the opportunities expanded. So yes, there will be changes, But should that be concerning at this point? I believe this is the point to pivot, to upskill ourselves and look at it as an opportunity on how it will help us to do our jobs better, because it's a tremendous opportunity to do things that were not possible before. So I'm trying to focus on the positives here, and I believe time will tell what happens, what does not. But I strongly believe in lifelong learning, and this has been a learning opportunity for me, and I really enjoy that.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment from you, Ankita. Guys, we are going to run out of time very soon, but I want to give you an opportunity to ask questions or share your comments or thoughts in the chat. What do you feel about AI being introduced into all aspects of our work, whether it's product development, quality, regulatory, clinical? We know we're going to be using this. What should we be thinking about in terms of responsible deployment of AI and upskilling our own perspective? So please share those thoughts and I'll bring them here as much as possible. Now, you mentioned lifelong learning. Yes, and people will say, fine, Ankita, I do a couple of training once a year, couple of years, and I'm so busy with my work. I don't have support from my company. We'll hear a lot of things like that. How do we still inspire people to say, hey, it's no longer an issue of going to a classroom and learning about it, but it's a everyday learning. And that's part of the reason why we do these conversations on Let's Talk Risk. But I would love to hear your perspective. Like, what do you do personally for lifelong learning? Can you share some of your strategies?
Definitely, Naveen. One of the things that I have personally started doing is interacting with a lot of thought leaders in this space, and they may not necessarily all be within your organization. There's so many other platforms to do that. If your company can sponsor you attending conferences, that's just like a hub for this thought exchange process. And I mean, you mentioned the recent conference you were at. So that's one way to look at it. There's so much thought leadership that's going on LinkedIn as well, for example. Anybody can access it. There are new standards or at least white papers being published on a regular basis. I mean, so kind of following the trend and seeing what's happening in this space. Start posting. That's something I started doing as well. Share your thoughts. Somebody can challenge it. Somebody can add on to it. So that's where like this whole very positive exchange of thoughts, one thought leads to another, brings up a whole new dimension to this whole thinking about how can we solve this problem, because it's not just a sector specific thing that one specific sector is facing. Yes, for life sciences, the risks and stakes are much higher. So we tend to go much deeper than some other areas. But let's leverage what's being done. Let's see how we can pivot, how we can move along on this journey by leaning on each other, by exchanging and kind of taking it from there.
And that's a new way of learning too, right? We might get the impression from what we hear about LLMs and things like ChatGPT or Claude, hey, you type something, you get the answer. But to me, that is based on our prior knowledge. And when we talk to each other, when we discuss it live, like we're doing right now, you and I are talking and people are participating, we create new knowledge, do we not? And that is probably not covered by an LLM yet. It'll catch up very quickly. So what I'm hearing you say is that pay attention to different types of learning as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the tribal knowledge, it comes with humans. LLMs, they still face hallucinations right now. So that's why you have to use your own sense of what you've known for so long, maybe in a different context, but that's something that we are not there with AIs. So we have to keep things in context and in perspective and build that community of thought leadership, I would say.
Yeah, fantastic. Ankita, we are coming close to our end time now. So I want to give you a couple of minutes to think about some key points you want to share with us as we close. In the meantime, I will share just one very brief announcement with everybody. I'm personally excited about this, and I have talked about this in the past sessions. I have launched an AI-based coach, and I call it LTR Risk Coach. You know that Let's Talk Risk is about helping us become better at applying risk management to real-world situations. Not about citing a regulation or a clause in 14971, but how to actually apply it. And that requires judgment, especially when we don't have data, we don't have enough information. So how do we learn to become better at critical thinking and judgment? That is where the LTR Risk Coach can help you. Think of it as a very smart chatbot, which is customized based on my personal knowledge and experience of applying risk-based principles. It is in a box. It doesn't go out to the internet and find an answer or a response for you, and it doesn't give you yes/no answers. It helps you to understand your assumptions, refine your judgment, consider options. It doesn't replace your expertise. I have had it tested by many people, and it is really pretty exciting. So I would love for you guys to try it out. It is available on a limited launch basis. And if you're interested, please reach out to me and I'll share the details with you. With that, Ankita, the floor is yours. Please share any parting thoughts with us.
What I would re-emphasizes let's treat AI governance by design as the connective tissue of a product lifecycle ecosystem. And to your point, let's embrace this new technology or anything new as a means to do something differently and use critical thinking to navigate the ambiguity and unknowns that are still a real challenge with AI. However, I'm very optimistic and I do believe in the tremendous potential this technology can offer in life sciences and millions of patients or even any other context that they can make a positive difference.
Wonderful. What a way to close. Key points: AI governance by design and enormous opportunity, and we have to really up our game to apply it. Thank you so much, Ankita, for coming to the show. I appreciate the time you took and sharing your insights with us. Guys, thank you again for joining. Every time we do this, you are showing up. I appreciate that. And those of you who cannot join, a recording will be available soon on my Let's Talk Risk newsletter on Substack. With that, have a good weekend. I wish you all the best. And Ankita, thank you once again.
Thank you again so much, Naveen, for the opportunity.